Welcome to Famous People You've Never Heard of, the podcast brought to you by Bluefire Theatre Company. Each week, Lottie, Linda or Steve will guide you through the centuries to shine the spotlight once again on entertainers the world has forgotten. Thank you so much for joining us as we chat to our fabulous guests and find out more about these forgotten superstars of history. If you enjoy the podcast, do please rate, review and most importantly, subscribe so that you never miss an episode and more people find out about us. And now, let us delay no longer in introducing you to a famous person you've never heard of. So here today in our Zoom room, we have got Elizabeth Blake, who is a dancer and choreographer and actress and all sorts of wonderful things. And she'll tell you all about that in a minute. And she's here to talk to us about Isadora Duncan, who is probably a famous person you've never heard of, might be. But Isadora, if I think I'm right in saying, changed the entire face of modern dance in the early 20th century. So we'll find out a lot more about her later from the expert, who is not me. So, Elizabeth, hi, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
Lovely to have you. So do you want to sort of tell the podcast peeps a little bit about yourself and what your interest in Isadora is or how it started, how you discovered her?
Absolutely. Well, yes, as you rightly say, I'm a dancer and an actor, and I do a little bit of writing as well. I first kind of got interested when I was working at a theatre in London, the King's Head Theatre in London, and there was a play on about Isadora. And I know I shouldn't publicise other people's plays, but it was very good.
We're very generous here.
It was a play called When She Danced by Martin Sherman. And I saw it and I loved it. And then I became a choreographer working at the theatre. And an American director brought a script about Isadora over to me and said, "Oh, you sound like the person to do this." But it was a little bit beyond my means at the time because it had a massive cast and included lots of children, which we couldn't quite fit on the stage there.
So small stage.
Small stage. So I thought about the idea. The idea percolated for a while because I liked her ideas of sort of free expression in dance. And then when I moved to Hampshire, which is where I live now, and to the Phoenix Theatre, where my husband and I work, Phoenix Theatre in Hampshire, I thought it was a perfect place to do my own version of the Isadora story. So it was a nice, intimate studio theatre. And because my husband runs it, I had a bit of an advantage.
Always helps.
It does help, yes.
Nepotism is not dead.
No. So I sort of did lots of research. I went to a wonderful place, which I shall name check, called the National Resource Centre for Dance at the University of Surrey in Guildford. And they're fantastic. You can contact them, say, I want to research whatever it is. And they will get out all their lovely archive material for you. And you can go along there free of charge and spend a whole day studying there, which is great.
How wonderful.
Yes.
If it's dance-based, they must have had a lot about Isadora.
Yes, they did. I said, what have you got on Isadora? They sent me about 5 pages of books and old program notes and all sorts of things. Yes.
Goodness. So what is it that's so fascinating about her?
Well, I think because she was very much a woman ahead of her time. And I think basically she's been an inspiration to a lot of people. The people came after her. But to me, because she felt dance was something really important, and it was something that really sort of touches people's souls and inspires them. And I think what she really did very, very well was she connected with her audience, and she really made them feel like they'd had a had an experience when they watched her dance. So, you know, at her time there was a lot of ballet around, which was lovely and pretty, but didn't really kind of touch people in the same way that, you know, that her dances did. So I think she did, you know, she did change a lot of the dance world, and she was very brave and courageous. And, you know, she had a lot of difficulties and a lot of criticism, but she was following her own path. And I think, you know, that was quite inspiring.
So she kind of took on the establishment, did she?
She did, absolutely. I mean, both as an artist, but also as a woman, because she had quite an unconventional personal life. Like she wouldn't get married, and she had children, but she wouldn't get married. And people thought that she was a bit scandalous.
Oh, do tell. We like a bit of scandal. So.
Because she was originally associated with a famous stage designer, Edward Gordon Craig, and he was very jealous, actually, of her artistic success, and he basically didn't really want her to continue with her work. And, you know, it was a choice between her art and the relationship, and the relation that her art won. But actually, he was already married. And yes. So
it sounds like a double standard to me.
Double standards, and maybe the scandal wasn't all on her side all the time. You could say. And then there was Paris Singer, who was, well, by our standards today, you'd say a billionaire. But he just wanted her to be a society wife, so to sort of give up her art and hold nice parties. And, you know, he said, well, when we get married, you can give all this up. And so she thought, no, that's not what I want. And then the third, I mean, there's been various key figures, but the third particular one was a Russian poet who was a lot younger than her, which caused a little bit of a stir. But he was, I think he had a bit of Russian temperament, you could say. And yes, very passionate. There was lots of arguments. Apparently he used to trash hotel rooms. Yes.
That's very rock and roll.
Very rock. I think today you would say he was a bit rock and roll, but I think he apparently was a genius with his writing, but I think he couldn't really cope with everyday life that well. And unfortunately, they split up and he left, and unfortunately he ended his own life, which was very sad. Yeah.
That's sad. And I think, I mean, we'll talk about her work in a minute, but didn't she have a lot more treasure? I think her children all died before her as well, didn't they?
Yes. She had a very sad personal life, really. And two of her children she lost when, unfortunately, they drowned because the car that they were traveling in accidentally went into the River Seine in Paris. And that was just because it was an accident. It was one of those things. The car stalled. The driver got out it was one of those old cars you have to crank the engine from the front of the car. So the driver had to get out to do that, but the brake wasn't properly on. And of course, the car just, I mean, these days there's railings and fences and things around that river, but there wasn't so much then. And the car just went over the bank and into the river, which was terribly sad. And she had one other child a little bit later, and unfortunately that one died at only about 24 hours old. It was born a little bit sickly, and this was at the beginning of the First World War in Paris. They'd called the doctor, but the Germans had blockaded Paris, and the doctor couldn't get through in time, and the child died, which was terribly sad.
Oh, that's awful. And it's, yes, again, it's one of these, you know, world events and how they affect real people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very, very sad. Oh. So that was First World War. So she was born at the end of the 19th century?
Yes, 1877. Yeah. So she was sort of in the Victorian era, but then, of course, towards the end of her life, because she died in 1927, then the world had moved on quite a lot because the First World War had happened. And, you know, the 1920s, the world changed quite a lot. And unfortunately, that was where she sort of fell out of fashion, because her sort of rather romantic style dances, which perhaps harked back to a different time, didn't quite fit in with all the sort of American influenced jazz dances and the Charleston and those sorts of things that people wanted to do at that time.
Yeah, she certainly wasn't cutting edge anymore, was she?
No, she was, yeah, definitely not.
And she was American, I think, wasn't she? She was born in the States.
She was American, but she never really went down that well in America. And then she became very critical of America, which, of course, they didn't like. But they particularly didn't like her association with Russia. Because when she went to Russia, she supported the people of Russia against the aristocracy. And so she was allied with communism, the early stages of communism, and America did not like that at all. And they called her a red sympathizer, and they actually took away her American citizenship. So she that's why she ended her life, when at the end of her life, she lived in France, not in America, because America basically didn't want her.
Gosh, I didn't realize that. I knew that after she went to Russia, she went back to the States and did a tour, didn't she? She performed and it didn't go down well.
No, she didn't go down well. And in fact, she used to, at the end of her dances, she used to actually stand on the stage and lecture her audiences. And I think a lot of people felt that she was giving them a good old telling off about the way they should live their lives. And yes, that didn't always go down too well. And her tour manager at one point said, "You've got to stop doing this, because people are not going to come and see your concerts if you're going to give them a hard time afterwards."
Yes, that's a fair comment, I suppose.
Yes.
But she doesn't sound the type who would have stopped.
No, I think she was driven. She was very driven. And I think she really did feel, I mean, it says in the play, she says, "I am the dancer of the future." And I really do think she felt that she was put on this earth to do that. It was a gift she was given, and it was a mission that she had. So I don't think, very much would have stopped her doing that.
So how did she actually start out? Was she classically trained in ballet?
Yes, although she sort of she criticized ballet a lot. She called herself an enemy of the ballet, which was quite a strong statement, I feel. She did, when she was a child, she did actually have some ballet training, but she left school at quite an early age, and the family were very poor because the father had left them, basically. So that was her mother, and she had a sister and two brothers as well. So it was a family of 4 children. The family were poor. So she actually decided to start teaching dance, and she was only very young herself. So she sort of started teaching dance in her own dance style to help bring money into the household. Really, that was how it started.
Goodness. And yet her name's been linked with people like Diaghilev and all sorts. So
absolutely.
Very humble beginnings.
Yes, very, very humble beginnings. And she did, inspire Diaghilev, as you say. And now, actually, even ballet people. So, for example, Sir Frederick Ashton, who was the choreographer of the Royal Ballet, you wouldn't think he's very ballet person, was a very ballet person, and you wouldn't think that he would be inspired by her. But when he was a very young man, he saw her dance, and he was definitely inspired by her. And she didn't criticize all ballet dancers. The one who she actually had a lot of time for was Anna Pavlova. So she did see her do her Dying Swan, her famous solo, and she actually did feel that she admired her artistry, I think.
It's interesting you say that, because what our listeners won't know, but you do, is that I saw your play up at the Edinburgh Fringe, and I did actually think of the Dying Swan in one of the bits of choreography. So,
oh, really?
Yes. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because I often am, but you are actually doing her choreography. You're doing Isadora's real dances, aren't you?
Yes. Well, yes. What I'm doing, I mean, I didn't want to try to copy them exactly, to try to be her, because who could? You can't do that. I think she was so unique that nobody could actually try to be her exactly. But what I want, and she did say to people, she didn't want people to imitate her, because even when she was around and after her death, there were quite a lot of people who tried to imitate her style, but they didn't really understand where it came from, so it didn't really work. So I didn't want to just say, oh, I'm going to do this step followed by that step, because she didn't believe in doing steps as such. What I wanted to do was to try to recreate perhaps a little bit of the spirit of what she did, so it might make people think perhaps this was a little bit of what it might have been like, to see her, because unfortunately there is virtually no film footage at all. There's a tiny, very short clip on YouTube of her dancing in a garden. It's the end of a dance in her very early days, and she literally, I think, does a couple of turns and a bow, and that's it. So nobody can really know. So I did a lot of research, and then I tried to just reimagine it and try to communicate perhaps what she was trying to communicate.
So it's a really impressive piece, actually. I would recommend anyone go and see Elizabeth's play. It's really good. Well, it's true. Don't say it if you don't mean it. It helps if you're a fan of dance, but it doesn't matter if you're not, because it's got lots of other stuff in it. So there you are. Now that she's feted and celebrated, how do the Americans feel about her now? Have they readopted her back into the family?
Yes, absolutely. And there is an organisation in New York called the Isadora Duncan Dance Foundation, who are very much dedicated to trying to preserve her, both preserve her legacy and also raise awareness, perhaps, to people that may not know about it, or people who obviously weren't around at that time. And they put on concerts and shows, and they do try to recreate some of her choreography. There's also a lot of books written about her, and so people can access those through their site as well. And I think, there's also been films about her. There was a very good film in, I think it was 1968, with Vanessa Redgrave playing her, which I did watch for research. So so I think there's definite shift, certainly in America, because now I think they now see the value of what she did at the time.
Yeah. And did she actually write her own memoirs at all?
Yeah, she was asked to, towards the end of her life, because she had no money, basically. She was, she didn't have very much money, but also when she did have money, she wasn't good with money. She didn't take care of money, put it like that. So she was asked to write her memoirs, and she did do that. And she's written an autobiography, which is available. People can buy it and read it. It's called My Life. Some of it is possibly not 100% accurate, because she didn't really want to do it. And I think it perhaps bored her doing it a little bit. And I think some of her friends perhaps added bits. And some of the friends were perhaps better described as hangers-on rather than friends. So I think there may be parts of it that, you might take with a pinch of salt. And also the publishers wanted to make it sellable, so they wanted to add a bit of spice, shall we say, to it. Whereas she felt, with all her personal life, she never felt it was scandalous. You see, she felt she was just being true to her own emotions, and she didn't feel that was wrong in any way. Other people may have thought, society doesn't approve.
Well, and it's interesting, isn't it? You say a bit of spice, because in her day-to-day life, so she's had these at least 3 significant relationships, and she wouldn't marry any of them. All her children are born out of wedlock, and we're talking about over 100 years ago. She went off to Russia and did all that political stuff that was obviously
Yeah.
frowned on by society. And I read somewhere, which I nearly fell off my chair when I saw it actually, that she was acquainted with Aleister Crowley.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, if nothing else was scandalous, I think any acquaintance with Aleister Crowley is a bit scary.
Definitely,
Yes.
because she had quite a dark side to her nature, I think, because her on her grandparents' side, she had some Celtic blood, so some Scottish and Irish blood. And I think, there was a little bit of the sort of mystical or the slightly darker side coming through there. And I don't know for sure, but I think, the Aleister Crowley thing might have been to do with trying to connect with her children after she'd lost her children, the spiritual side of life, I think. And actually, one of her friends then married Aleister Crowley, and then used to do performances almost doing impressions of Isadora.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so it was all a bit strange.
Yes, because I know that he based one of his characters in a book on her, but changed the name. But I didn't realise that his missus was doing impressions as well. So
Yeah,
who knew? Yeah, so she certainly mixed with the great and the good.
Yes, she did. Yes, absolutely.
And was she sort of a very solitary person and just all about her performance, or was she interested in passing her skills on and teaching?
She was quite, I mean, before a performance, she would like to literally, go into her dressing room or wherever it was, her studio, and just be quiet and be away from everybody. And she said that was the way to get what she called the motor in her soul moving, so that she could then express that through her dance. In terms of passing on her dances or her technique, she had several attempts to found a school, and because of the probably financial mismanagement, they never really worked. They never really amounted to anything very much. But she always felt that it was difficult to teach what she did, because she didn't really, do steps, and she didn't really have a technique in the same way that ballet did. It was more about the inspiration had to come from inside the person who was dancing. Although she did say that in order to dance, you did have to do exercises, look after your body, make your body a very creative instrument. So it wasn't just about, you just sort of waft about. There were some sort of routines that you had to go through to craft what you were doing.
And when she got to the end of her life, she was living in France, wasn't she? And
Yes.
was she still relatively poor then, or had she made some money back?
She was, at the end of her life, she was poor. For a while, she lived, she stayed at this hotel in France, and it was rather expensive hotel. And basically, she kind of, I suppose in a way, she sort of pulled the wool over their eyes a little bit, because she said, well, as long as I'm living here and I'm ordering, expensive food, and, I'm in an expensive hotel, they will assume that I'm an important person and I can pay my bills still. But in fact, she didn't pay the bills. And I believe that just before she died, it may have been the day before or even on the day, the hotel finally sent a massive bill to her room, which of course she wouldn't be able to pay. But yes, no, she definitely didn't really have any money at the end of her life, which was, which I think was sad.
It is, but it's a common enough story, isn't it? We hear it all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
people reach great heights, and they're either overly generous or they're silly, or
Yes.
unlucky. All of the above can happen.
Absolutely.
Some of them are all of the above.
Yes.
Yeah. And tell me, because I'm always interested in the music element of these things. Did she have any special pieces composed for her, or did she choose certain types of music to dance to?
Yeah, she did veer towards the great composers, if you like, because actually at the time when she, and certainly earlier in her earlier life, a lot of the music used for ballets was actually specially composed particularly for those ballets. So, you know, that it would be composed, so you'd have so many bars of music for this part of the ballet, so many bars of music for the next part of the ballet. She didn't want to be tied down to that. And she felt that she wanted to use, like Beethoven was somebody she greatly admired. Wagner was another one that she greatly admired. So she, you know, she went straight to the top.
Absolutely. She was a Valkyrie, wasn't she?
Yes, she absolutely was. And she felt, see, that kind of music really had been kind of venerated as almost sort of sacred type of music. And people would go and listen to it in orchestral concerts. But, you know, the fact somebody would dare to dance to it, to try and add another layer to something that was already almost sacred, was a bit of a shock to some people.
I can imagine, yes.
Yeah.
And did the composers actually endorse what she was doing, any of the more modern ones?
I think they possibly, I mean, obviously the ones who were still alive, yes. I know, you know, she was invited to dance. I think this was by Wagner's widow, actually, at a big, you know, festival. And I think, yes, they definitely did. They did endorse that, although they had ballet dancers in that production as well. And the ballet dancers and the supporters of the ballet dancers were not too happy about Isadora appearing with, you know, her bare feet and her bare legs and her flimsy tunic. And that's why, as I reference in the play, some of them actually threw tacks down onto the stage, or the carpet. She used to dance on a blue carpet, and it cut her feet and made them bleed. So
that's
yes,
awful. And she carried on.
She carried on. Yes, you know, I think she was a very courageous person, and I admire that. She probably wasn't very easy to live with. She was a very driven person, but I think, you know, she had the courage of her convictions, and I do admire that.
And did she sort of remain in the political limelight as well? Or was she more about sort of rights for individuals rather than a big political movement?
Yes, I mean, she would say that she wasn't a politician and she wasn't particularly interested in politics, although through her art, I think she made certain points, like, you know, dancing these revolutionary dances in Russia at the time of the Russian Revolution, and that was very much celebrating the ordinary people, but also trying to show through dance the struggles that ordinary poor people had, you know, people who were starving, people who, you know, who'd lost everything. So I think there was a political element, although she wasn't, she didn't sort of particularly want to meet politicians and discuss policies or anything like that.
And I seem to remember when you were doing the show in Edinburgh, didn't you meet someone who had known her, or?
Yes. Yes. So it was an amazing well, I don't know whether it was a coincidence, maybe it wasn't. And I think it's the type of thing that can only happen at the Edinburgh Fringe, because all sorts of things can happen at the Edinburgh Fringe, as I know you know. But it's on the last performance, a lovely man came along, and he was a ex-dancer, professional dancer, now dance teacher. He actually worked at Dance Base, the big national dance agency in Edinburgh. And he said he wanted to talk to me after the show. And I had a chat to him. And he had made quite extensive studies of Isadora. And he had been taught a sort of small excerpt of one of her dances, which, as far as he knew, was as authentic as it could possibly get. It was to a Chopin piece of music, piano music. And he said, right, I'm going to teach it to you. And I thought he meant maybe over Zoom once we'd gone home. He went, no, I don't do Zoom. I'm doing it right here, right now.
Oh, how wonderful. In the street
So,
in Edinburgh.
yeah, well, yeah. So we went literally outside the front of the venue in the public courtyard where people were sitting having their tea and their coffee. And he taught it to me, and my husband was filming it.
So
And
you remember it.
we gathered a little crowd.
Oh, how
So
wonderful.
I'm probably going to include that dance in the show now, because I think it was a privilege to be taught that, because it would have been handed down through generations.
That's just a lovely story.
Yes.
And of course, what we will talk about your play soon and where it's going to be, so people can go and see it. But what we haven't talked about really is the elephant in the room, which is possibly the only thing that people do know about Isadora Duncan, and that's how the poor woman died.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Which is, it was so tragic. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. I mean, she was only 50 years old, which is nothing really, no age. And she did like wearing scarves and shawls and, long, if you think about the 1920s, and maybe long flowing scarves and shawls. And she was going to go out for a ride in a car. Now, there's a bit of controversy. I would like to think it was a Bugatti, because Bugatti was the car of the day, the car that everybody wanted in 1927. Other people have said it was an Amel car, which is a similar make, I believe. I don't really know much about cars, but it looks very similar anyway. So there's a bit of controversy. Anyway, she had thought about, she wanted to buy this car, even though she had no money, but this is what she did. And so she was literally going to be taken out for a drive in the car. So she wasn't driving. There was somebody else, a man, who was driving. And unfortunately, those cars at the time, I think I'm right in saying the passenger seat is set a little bit further back from the driver's seat. It's quite close to the back wheel. And the wheels were different in those days. They didn't necessarily have all the guards and things over, the mud guards and all the rest of it. And they had literally just started the engine, gone no more than, I don't know, just a few yards, and the scarf got caught in the back wheel of the car, and it did literally strangle her. So it was a very sudden, shocking, dramatic death. But in a way, I suppose you wouldn't expect her death to be anything other than dramatic, because her life was very dramatic. So in a way, I don't know, perhaps these things have a way of, maybe it was written in the stars, I don't know.
It does seem, I mean, it sounds terrible, but it does seem a fitting ending for such a dramatic life.
Yes, and in a way, it made her even more famous. It made her sort of famous again. It's a time when she was fading. Her reputation was fading, and then it kind of made her famous again. And I suppose it is a thing that most people know about her. So one of the reasons I wanted to do the play was I wanted to tell people that there was a lot more to know.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
quite right too. And
Yeah.
I have discovered that obviously since that horrendous accident, there is an Isadora Duncan syndrome officially in medicine. There we are.
Oh.
Yes. It's on Wikipedia, it must be true.
Oh, well, yes.
To this refers to, I'm reading it now, injury or death consequent to entanglement of neckwear with a wheel or other machinery.
Oh, my goodness. Wow.
There you are. So you heard it here first.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I think, if she had just sort of lived on into old age and lived in poverty, and sort of a lot, you see, when she wasn't famous anymore, a lot of her so-called friends disappeared. And I think she might have been quite a lonely figure, and perhaps lonely and poor, and having had such an amazing, extraordinary life, perhaps later on she wouldn't have wanted to live a very sad life. And she actually did say to people that after she lost her children, in a way she did go into a deep depression, a deep decline, unsurprisingly. And in a way she sort of said perhaps she didn't really want to be on this earth anymore. She wanted to join them wherever they might be.
Yes, and she
Yeah.
had just the man in young Alistair to help her.
Yes.
Yes. I know I shouldn't keep going on about it, but I was fascinated by that. It's amazing. So the play then, it's obviously you've done it at Edinburgh. Had you done it before that, or did it debut at Edinburgh?
Well, no, I did do it before because, you know, fortunately working at a theatre, I was able to put it on with the support of that theatre, the lovely Phoenix Theatre and Arts Centre in Hampshire. And but I wrote it originally as a two-hander. So there was me and another actor, and he played the key roles of the key men in her life. But then with the pandemic coming on, and and I'm a freelance, so life was very difficult. Losing money during the pandemic, couldn't really do regular work. When it came to taking it up to Edinburgh, I thought I can't really pay another actor for the re-rehearsals, take him up there, pay for the accommodation, do all that. So making it a one-woman show was a little bit of a cost-cutting exercise. But I just thought there was a good way of doing it as a solo show. And I had also been asked to do some talks for the University of the Third Age, the U3A groups. So I thought, why don't I combine some of that sort of talk as narration with my parts as Isadora and try and mould those two things together? So I wanted to do sort of part dramatization, part narration, and part dance. And I wanted to see if I could blend them.
And you did.
Thank you.
Super. And where is she on next? Has she got other dates planned?
Yes, well, I'm very pleased to say I have a booking in November, on Wednesday the 6th of November, and that's down in Hampshire again. It's Petersfield in Hampshire, and they have a lovely museum in Petersfield with a nice indoor space there, and they're very interested in historical figures and in people learning more, finding out more through theatre, really, about historical figures. So I'm doing that there in November. And then I'm just finalising. There was a lovely theatre director who came to see the show in Edinburgh, and I'm now working out the dates for a booking. It'll be either April or May next year at South Hill Park Arts Centre in Bracknell in Berkshire.
Super.
So those are two, and obviously I'm just trying to work on more at the moment.
Absolutely, and we should put in the show notes. We'll put all your website details and all of those exciting things so people can track you down.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Follow wherever you may be.
Yes.
And so, just quickly before we go, if you were going to have a fantasy dinner party, sometimes I spring this on people because it amuses me. Isadora would obviously be there.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Anyone else? I mean, I should imagine Isadora could have been quite a disruptive guest, so she'd be quite fun.
Yes, I think she would have done. She would have been quite a disruptive guest. I think, it would be fascinating to sort of put her with other people who've made a big impression or changed the world of the arts in some ways, even if they were from a completely and totally different era. So, could you imagine Isadora and Shakespeare, for example? What kind of, because she was very much, later on in her life, she did want to dance about things that affected human beings, and the human condition, because she wanted people to feel what it was like to be a human. And Shakespeare obviously wrote a lot about the human condition as well. So I think that would be quite a fascinating conversation. She also, it's interesting you mentioning the Alistair Crowley, because she wasn't a follower of conventional religion at all. She was, although she was very spiritual, but it's in a different way. So I can imagine she would have had some quite heated discussions with somebody like a pope, for example. I could see that being quite an entertaining and discussion.
Well, look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really interesting.
Well, thank you.
And I'm going to go and try and find her book and see if I can pick out the bits that might have been exaggerated for her.
Oh yes, P.S. It's a very interesting read, and I actually think it's inspiring, and I think there are messages that today, even nearly 100 years later, that we can take from that. I mean, particularly just before we finish, I mentioned very quickly, her idea about how nature is so important, and respect for nature and connecting with nature, which with what's happening in the world today, very important still. About dance being part of education for children, very important, because dance always gets cut
Yes.
when there's cuts in the arts. And also about women basically needing to value their own natural bodies and not feel they have to kind of enhance everything and go under cosmetic surgery and completely change and aspire to look like something that isn't natural. And I think that's an important message as well for people today.
It is. She was definitely, as you said earlier, ahead of her time, wasn't she?
Yeah, and I think some of the things she said, they do resonate now. It does go through the ages, and they do resonate today, and I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to do the play.
No, it's brilliant. I'd love to see her Twitter account.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Can you imagine? She'd be being blocked by people all over the place, wouldn't she?
Absolutely, yes.
Anyway, we digress. So thank you so much for coming on to chat to us today. We will look forward to finding out a little bit more with our continued research on Isadora Duncan. I hope everyone sort of picks up on that, because I think she's great and everyone should know a bit more about her.
Definitely, yes.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to Famous People You've Never Heard of. If you've enjoyed this week's podcast and would like to find out more, do take a look at the show notes, where you'll find further information and reading material, as well as a transcription of today's episode. If you like what we do and would like to support our work, please check out our Patreon page, which can be found at patreon.com/bluefiretheatre. Or, if you prefer to keep us going with a caffeine fix, you can do so at ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com/bluefiretheatre. We really appreciate any support you can give to help keep the show on the road. And we'd also love it if you give the show a rate and a review. It really helps us to remain visible out there. And don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, where we'd love to see you.